Jack Coleman had been trucking across America for nearly 2 decades. He had seen everything the road had to offer. Storms that turned highways into rivers, breakdowns in the middle of nowhere, and even a few close calls with bandits. But nothing had ever truly unnerved him. Until now. It all started with a phone call. His burner phone, the one he kept for last-minute job offers, buzzed late at night. Unknown number. He hesitated but answered. "Mr. Coleman?" a deep voice asked. "Who's asking?" "This is Black Hollow Freight Services. We have a job for you, a high-paying one." Jack frowned. He had never heard of them before, but the voice sounded official. He listened as the man explained. A cargo delivery to a remote Appalachian town called Cold Hollow. The pay was almost too good to be true. "What's the catch?" Jack asked. "There isn't one," the voice replied. "Just make sure the cargo arrives by dawn. No detours, no stops." Jack didn't ask about the cargo. That was rule number 1 in his business. Deliver first, ask questions never. He agreed, transferred the advance payment into his account, and set off before sunrise. His destination wasn't on any of his old maps, and his GPS had trouble locking in the coordinates. Still, it eventually led him onto a quiet highway stretching into the misty Appalachians. As he fueled up at the last truck stop before the mountains, an old-timer in a worn-out cap eyed him from across the lot. "Where you headin', son?" "Cold Hollow." The old man stiffened, his face paled. "Ain't nobody been out there in years." Jack chuckled. "That's so?" The man just shook his head. "Be careful. Roads out there ain't what they used to be." Jack nodded, dismissing the warning as the paranoia of an old-timer who had seen too many horror movies. He climbed into his truck, fired up the engine, and pulled out onto the highway. As he drove, the world outside grew darker. The sun dipped behind thick, rolling clouds. The road stretched endlessly into the unknown. Then, a sudden gust of wind rocked his rig. His CB radio crackled with static. A voice, barely a whisper, pushed through the interference. "Turn back." Jack gripped the wheel tighter, eyes locked on the road ahead. The job had only just begun. Jack drove deep into the Appalachian wilderness. The hum of his truck's engine the only sound breaking the eerie silence of the deserted road. His GPS guided him away from the main highway, taking him onto a narrow, unmarked stretch of asphalt that seemed barely used. He felt a growing unease as the trees closed in around him, their gnarled branches reaching toward the road like skeletal fingers. His CB radio crackled with static again. "Turn back." The voice was faint, distant, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. Jack narrowed his eyes and grabbed the receiver. "Who is this?" he asked, keeping his tone steady. Silence. Then, more static. A low, guttural chuckle crackled through the speakers before fading away. Jack exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Probably just some idiot messing around on the open channels. CB pranks weren't uncommon, especially in places like this. He pressed forward, the road twisting and turning as it climbed into the mountains. The further he drove, the worse the condition of the asphalt became. Cracks, potholes, and patches of loose gravel forced him to slow down. This place wasn't just remote. It was forgotten. Then, his headlights caught something ahead. A figure stood on the roadside, barely illuminated by the truck's beams. A man, motionless, wearing a ragged flannel shirt and worn-out jeans. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. Jack instinctively let off the gas. The man didn't move. He didn't wave for help. He just stared. Jack's grip tightened on the wheel. Something about this felt wrong. His instincts screamed at him, "Keep driving, don't stop." As the truck rolled past, Jack flicked his eyes toward the side mirror. The man was still watching. Then, his head snapped unnaturally fast, following the truck's movement. Jack's pulse spiked. His foot pressed harder on the accelerator, the truck roaring forward into the darkness. When he checked the mirror again, the man was gone. Jack swallowed hard. He had seen strange things on the road before. People on drugs, hitchhikers playing tricks, even wild animals acting weird. But this was something else. His stomach churned as he pushed deeper into the night, the darkness thickening around him like a living thing. And he still had a long way to go. Jack's fingers tightened around the wheel, his knuckles whitening as he pushed the truck harder along the twisting road. The eerie encounter with the roadside figure still lingered in his mind. Something about the way the man had moved, so unnatural, so wrong, sent ice down his spine. The deeper he drove, the worse it got. The road narrowed even more, swallowed by towering trees that seemed to press in on him. His GPS screen flickered, then froze completely before displaying no signal in dull red letters. His phone? No bars, no service. Jack cursed under his breath. A trucker's worst nightmare wasn't ghosts or monsters, it was getting stranded in the middle of nowhere. He eased off the gas slightly, considering pulling over to check his paper maps when, bang! A sudden thump against the side of the truck jolted him. It wasn't a pothole. It felt like something had hit the rig. Jack flicked on his side mirror and scanned the road. Nothing, just darkness stretching endlessly behind him. Another bang, this time from the trailer. Something was on his truck. His pulse pounded as he checked his mirrors again. Then for a brief second he saw it. A shape. A handprint smeared against the side of the trailer in something dark. Blood. Jack's instincts kicked in. He floored it. The truck groaned under the sudden acceleration, but he didn't care. He had to get the hell out of here. The CB radio crackled again. "You shouldn't have come here, Jack." His stomach dropped. He hadn't told anyone his name. His throat tightened as the voice dissolved into garbled static. His headlights barely cut through the thickening mist, and the road became more treacherous with each passing mile. He gritted his teeth, pushing forward when something ran across the road. A dark, humanoid shape, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Jack barely had time to react. He yanked the wheel, the truck swerving violently, tires skidding on the damp road. The weight of the trailer swung out behind him, and for a terrifying moment, he thought he was about to jackknife. But then, it was gone. The shape, the figure, whatever it was. Jack straightened out, breathing hard, his heart hammering in his chest. He didn't know what the hell was out here, but one thing was certain. There was no turning back now. Jack gritted his teeth as his truck rumbled through the dense mist, his nerves frayed from what he had just witnessed. He didn't believe in ghosts or demons. He was a man of the road, grounded in reality. But something out here wasn't right. His GPS was dead, his CB radio was filled with nothing but static, and his phone was as useless as a brick. The only thing guiding him was the flickering glow of his headlights cutting through the fog. Then, through the mist, he saw it. A sign. Cold Hollow, 5 miles. Jack exhaled. Finally, something tangible. He wasn't just aimlessly drifting through some forgotten stretch of road. There was an actual town up ahead. But as he got closer, the unease in his gut only grew. The road became rough, cracked with deep fissures as if time had swallowed it whole. The trees on either side looked twisted, malformed. Some had old wooden crosses nailed to their trunks, others had deep gouges, as if something with massive claws had ripped into them. Then, as he rounded a sharp bend, the town appeared. It was dead. Buildings, old and rotting, stood in silence. Storefronts were boarded up, windows shattered, doors left ajar. A lone gas station with rusted-out pumps stood at the edge of town, its sign barely hanging on by a few corroded bolts. Jack slowed the truck to a crawl. There were no cars, no people, no lights. Nothing but the quiet, suffocating weight of emptiness. His headlights swept over the cracked pavement, revealing faded tire marks. Other trucks had come through here before, but where were they now? A sudden movement caught his eye. Up ahead, standing in the middle of the road, was a single wooden crate. It was his cargo. Jack's stomach clenched. He was supposed to be delivering this shipment to someone, but the town was abandoned. No sign of a receiver, no sign of life. Then from somewhere deep within the town he heard it. A whisper. Not from the radio, not from his head, from the street. Jack's breath hitched. He peered out of his windshield, eyes scanning the darkness. Something was watching him. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it. And whatever it was waiting for him to step out of the truck. Jack sat in his idling truck, gripping the wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. His headlights cast long, eerie shadows across the abandoned town, illuminating the lone wooden crate in the middle of the cracked road. Something about it felt wrong. The town was silent. Too silent. No wind, no rustling trees, no distant animals scurrying through alleyways. Just emptiness. Jack exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think rationally. This was just another job. A delivery. He had done this 1,000 times before. The fact that Cold Hollow looked like something out of a horror movie wasn't his problem. But then, where was the receiver? He reached for his clipboard, flipping through the paperwork. The delivery slip only had one instruction: deliver to Cold Hollow. Do not open. Jack frowned. No address, no name. His stomach twisted into knots. Something about this whole thing wasn't right. For a long moment, he just stared at the crate. Then, his headlights flickered. The dashboard lights dimmed for a brief second before returning to normal. Jack tensed. His truck had never done that before. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, a noise. A faint scraping sound like wood dragging against asphalt. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He peered through the windshield. The crate was closer. Not much, just a few inches. But he was sure of it. His pulse pounded in his ears. There was no wind. Nothing should have moved that box. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He reached toward his glove compartment, fingers grazing over the cold steel of his revolver. Jack never carried it unless he was on jobs that took him deep into unknown territory, like this one. For the first time in years, he felt like he might actually need it. He took a deep breath, then slowly opened his door. The second his boots hit the pavement, the temperature dropped. His breath curled in the air, white and ghostly. The silence was heavier now, suffocating. Jack took slow, measured steps toward the crate, his heart pounding harder with every inch. He could hear something faint coming from inside. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like knuckles rapping against the wood. He reached the crate and placed a hand on the rough surface. Something moved inside. Jack yanked his hand back as if burned. Then from behind him, a whisper. "Why did you come?" Jack spun around, gun drawn. But there was nothing there. Just the empty town. And the crate, sitting just a little bit closer than before. Jack stood frozen, staring at the crate. The rhythmic tapping from inside had stopped the moment he touched it. The night air was thick with an unnatural chill, and an overwhelming sense of being watched crawled over his skin. He swallowed hard. He had two choices: walk away, leave the crate, and get back in his truck. Open it. Jack had followed enough horror stories on the road to know that the second option was a bad idea. But something about this job wasn't letting him go. Slowly, he reached into his jacket, pulling out his pocket knife. His breath curled in the frigid air as he pressed the tip against the crate's wooden lid. "Do not open." The warning from the delivery slip echoed in his mind. Jack hesitated. Then, the crate moved. Just a slight shift, but enough for the wood to creak. Jack stepped back fast, knife still clenched in his hand. His instincts screamed at him to turn around, to get the hell out of here, but something deep inside the crate let out a sound. A low, rasping breath. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs. There was something alive in there. Before he could think, a sudden gust of wind rushed through the town, rattling the broken windows and sending loose papers flying down the empty street. And then, the crate lid snapped open. Jack stumbled backward, his eyes locking onto the dark opening. Inside, there was no cargo, no supplies, no packages, just something moving, something crawling. It was thin, its limbs stretching in unnatural ways as it slowly unfurled itself from the shadows of the crate. A hand, long fingers, too many joints, the skin gray and taut, gripped the wooden edge. Jack's blood turned ice. The thing inside wasn't human. Its eyes opened, two sunken black voids locked onto Jack. And then, it whispered his name. Jack. Jack's mind screamed, but his body refused to move. Then, the thing lunged. Jack snapped out of his shock just as the thing lunged at him, its bony fingers stretching toward his face. He dived back, barely avoiding the creature's grasp. His boots scraped against the pavement as he scrambled away, his breathing ragged. The thing from the crate twisted unnaturally, its limbs bending in ways that no living thing should move. Its sunken black eyes never blinked as it crawled out onto the pavement, its fingers clicking against the cracked road like insect legs. Jack's instincts screamed at him. He had to get back to the truck. The creature let out a horrid, guttural clicking sound before charging. Jack turned and sprinted toward the rig, his heart hammering in his chest. The thing was fast. It moved in bursts, 1 second crawling on all fours, the next leaping forward, its long arms swinging unnaturally. Jack reached his truck just as the thing's hand swiped at his back, barely missing. He threw himself into the cab, slamming the door shut and locking it. For a moment he thought he was safe. Then, thud. The thing hit the door. Jack jumped as the entire truck shook. He jammed the keys into the ignition, turning it over. Nothing. His engine wouldn't start. His hands were shaking as he turned the key again. Still nothing. Outside, the creature climbed up the truck, its long, spindly fingers clawing at the window. Jack's breath hitched. The thing was grinning, a mouth too wide, full of razor-like teeth stretching unnaturally across its face. Then it spoke. "Jack, let me in." Jack's stomach dropped. It knew his name. It pressed its pale, skeletal hand against the glass, its black eyes boring into him. Jack turned the key one more time. The truck roared to life. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He slammed the gas pedal, the rig lurching forward just as the thing tried to crawl over the windshield. With a sickening thump, it rolled off the hood and disappeared into the darkness. Jack's tires screeched as he tore down the road, not looking back. But something told him. The thing wasn't gone. And it wasn't done with him yet. Jack snapped out of his shock just as the thing lunged at him, its bony fingers stretching toward his face. He dived back, barely avoiding the creature's grasp. His boots scraped against the pavement as he scrambled away, his breathing ragged. The thing from the crate twisted unnaturally, its limbs bending in ways that no living thing should move. Its sunken black eyes never blinked as it crawled out onto the pavement, its fingers clicking against the cracked road like insect legs. Jack's instincts screamed at him. He had to get back to the truck. The creature let out a horrid, guttural clicking sound before charging. Jack turned and sprinted toward the rig, his heart hammering in his chest. The thing was fast. It moved in bursts, 1 second crawling on all fours, the next leaping forward, its long arms swinging unnaturally. Jack reached his truck just as the thing's hand swiped at his back, barely missing. He threw himself into the cab, slamming the door shut and locking it. For a moment he thought he was safe. Then, thud. The thing hit the door. Jack jumped as the entire truck shook. He jammed the keys into the ignition, turning it over. Nothing. His engine wouldn't start. His hands were shaking as he turned the key again. Still nothing. Outside, the creature climbed up the truck, its long, spindly fingers clawing at the window. Jack's breath hitched. The thing was grinning, a mouth too wide, full of razor-like teeth stretching unnaturally across its face. Then it spoke. "Jack, let me in." Jack's stomach dropped. It knew his name. It pressed its pale, skeletal hand against the glass, its black eyes boring into him. Jack turned the key one more time. The truck roared to life. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He slammed the gas pedal, the rig lurching forward just as the thing tried to crawl over the windshield. With a sickening thump, it rolled off the hood and disappeared into the darkness. Jack's tires screeched as he tore down the road, not looking back. But something told him. The thing wasn't gone. And it wasn't done with him yet. Jack's mind reeled. His fingers dug into the steering wheel, knuckles white with tension. The thing outside, its pale fingers dragging down the glass, was terrifying enough. But the reflection in the mirror? That wasn't him. His own face, but wrong, grinning wide, its lips stretched too far, black, soulless eyes locked onto him. Jack jerked his gaze away, refusing to look at it. He had to get out of here. But how do you escape a road that never ends? The fog thickened, swirling like living shadows around his truck. The yellow lines on the pavement twisted and warped, stretching endlessly into the abyss. The thing outside rapped its knuckles against the window. Tap, tap, tap. Jack snapped. He yanked his revolver from the glove box and fired. Bang! The windshield spidered with cracks, the bullet passing right through the thing's face. But it didn't flinch. Instead, it laughed. A sound so distorted, so inhuman, it crawled under Jack's skin. The radio crackled back to life. "You can't run, Jack." Jack gritted his teeth, forcing his eyes on the road, only to see something worse. The town. Cold Hollow was in front of him again. The empty buildings, the broken streetlights, the damn crate still sitting in the middle of the road. He had driven in a circle. No, no, no! Jack slammed his fist against the dash, his pulse pounding. The road was looping. He couldn't leave. The thing outside crawled onto the windshield, pressing its grinning face against the cracked glass. "Let me in." Jack screamed and slammed the wheel, the truck skidding, and then the lights cut out. The truck's engine died. The radio hissed one last time. Nowhere left to run. And then the darkness swallowed everything. Jack sat paralyzed in the driver's seat, his breath ragged, his hands clenched so tightly around the wheel that his knuckles had turned white. The darkness around him was suffocating. The truck was dead. The headlights were gone. But the thing was still there. It clung to the windshield, grinning wider, its soulless black eyes burrowing into him. The cracks in the glass deepened as its long, unnatural fingers pressed against the surface. Jack's body screamed at him to run, but where? His gaze flicked to the side mirror. Cold Hollow waited for him. The road had looped. There was no escape. "You brought it here, Jack," the CB radio whispered, "and now it wants to go home." Jack's heart stopped. The crate. His cargo. This thing had been inside it, and now it wanted something from him. Slowly, almost as if guided by something beyond his control, Jack reached for the glove box. His fingers trembled as they closed around his delivery slip. There, in small, almost faded ink, was a second instruction he hadn't noticed before. "Deliver to Cold Hollow. Do not open. Do not return alone." His throat went dry. Do not return alone. Jack's mind raced. Did that mean? The thing suddenly crawled backward, peeling itself off the windshield like some horrible, contorted insect. It landed on the pavement with an inhuman grace, its bony limbs unfolding. Then it turned its head toward the town, waiting. Jack's pulse pounded. It didn't want to kill him. It wanted him to finish the job. Jack swallowed hard. His hands were shaking. He had no choice. Taking one last shaky breath, Jack slowly pushed the truck door open. The cold air hit him like a slap, his breath fogging in the eerie silence. The thing stood ahead of him, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, grinning still. Jack took slow, hesitant steps toward Cold Hollow. As he crossed the town's threshold, the fog thickened, swallowing him whole. Behind him, the truck sat motionless, its headlights forever dark. Jack Coleman was never seen again. But sometimes truckers passing through the Appalachian highways still hear a whisper over their CB radios. Turn back. And if they listen too closely, they swear they hear a voice that sounds just like Jack's.